First P is public awareness to educate the educated on nationalistic important topics. We do conduct seminars, symposia on various topics and also debates of different opinions and leave the judgment to the audience. And our second P is our publications. The content generated to this type of meetings, we put it published as a books. And also we have one journal called Bharatiya Prajna. For the last 19 years we are running this. It is 60 pages English journal, a nationalistic magazine for thinking people. If you got a bad habit of reading, it's a good journal. So third P is Puraskar. Every year we do give Intellectual Excellency Award through Prajna Bharati. So for the last till now we had given about 19 people we have honored them with Prajna Puraskar. Dr. Satish Reddy, a missile man, Shishya of our late Abdul Kalam ji, and Asyavadi Prakash Rao garu just received Padma Shri also yesterday. And Bhaskar Yogi, these three we have honored with Prajna Puraskar. And the fourth P is very interesting, pick up the patriots. So we do search for people who are working for the nation and we give the hall for them, the podium for them to exhibit their talent. Their books will be released through this. That's how we are doing. So how you all can contribute to this? First you can fill up the slip given to you and give it to our volunteers. So you will be in our mailing list. That's how you can help us to get the future programs of ours. And we have Bharatiya Prajna, you can subscribe this journal. And also by sponsoring this program, you can help us. And we have ATG, you can donate to Prajna Bharati. So with this, I take leave of you. We are searching for people to be in Prajna Bharati forum. We are searching for fine people. Fine money, F means financially helping people. I, intellectual input, N, networking, E, event management. So these qualities, we welcome them to be in this movement. Coming 2-3 years are very crucial. So we should pep up our intellectual movement. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sharma ji. Now I request Professor Ramesh Reddy ji, Management Committee member, AV College, to give a brief introduction regarding the institution.
Thank you very much to Prajna Bharati for having organizing this event here in our college, AV College. We are very honored. And intellectual pursuit, together with the academic institutions, will definitely go a long way. And also with Hanuman Chaudhary ji, Padma Shri Dr. T. Hanuman Chaudhary ji, a revolutionary intellectual and a nationalist to the core. He always argues with clarity on various issues. Then we have Lieutenant Colonel A.R.K. Reddy garu. Of course, I don't know much, like any other defense army personnel. His love for the nation is it is second to none, I feel. And again, we have the honored academician, Chandrasekhar garu. I'm sure he will present a wonderful account of this book. And thanks to Gauri Dwivedi, who has taken such an initiative, a bold initiative. Actually, we are passing through a very great crisis, the whole world. American government, present day government, what it did, it has withdrawn from Afghanistan and has thrown entire Asia in the turmoil, as it is West Asia was in turmoil. And now the whole of this Asian continent and part of Europe, they are all in great trouble. Now Taliban in Afghanistan will be a great problem for the whole of this world. And they escaped. What they wanted to defend in Afghanistan, Now they have thrown that onerous responsibility on India, to looking for India to fight. I foresee a second Mahabharata war in Afghanistan as the Kurukshetra, next Kurukshetra. It is in turmoil, it will be in turmoil, and like Gandhari's and then Shekunis interference with India, we will have problems in Afghanistan. And China is another giant. It is really amazing. Together, we became free. In 1948, they came to, they have their freedom, I would rather say. And amazingly, they have grown in such bounds. Today, they are dictating the whole world. Be it information technology, manufacturing side, whole world is now dependent on China regarding manufacturing side. And their, true to the dragon, their urge to occupy the whole world is not digestible for all over the world. See, they occupied everywhere. They have set up, they have put in their finances in almost major countries in Africa and the Asian countries, and they are definitely they will create problems for the world. I don't know what is their urge. But they are very fast in grasping the opportunities. For example, when we were on Indo-China Chamber of Commerce and Trade, we were there in China, and I addressed that one of the meetings, where what I said is, you have occupied the Tibet. There are herbals, Tibetan herbals are very, they are abundant. And India had the software, that is our Vaidyas used to make the best use of those medicines. But you having occupied the Tibet, we are cut off from those herbal medicines, and that science or the manufacturing process are creating the medicines is slowly fading out. The last generation is here in India. We may have 100 wars with China, but let not this knowledge of Tibetan herbal medicines vanish. It is in the interest of human needs. So this is what I said. And you know, immediately after that, they came to me after the talk, and they wanted to have business interaction. I said, it is $1 billion business. So Indo-China trade is $1 billion business, Tibetan herbal medicines. See, there are some herbs like Carpochitum, Cordyceps, Lychee, very, very difficult to acquire. But they are there, and they are abundantly available. So they are very sharp to catch the persons. And another thing, beautiful thing I observed is, every nation sends its youth on an exchange program. So also we do from India. From India, we never bothered after coming back whether they have come back, are we in a position to use their knowledge, their experience, we never bother. Our bureaucracy has failed on that front. Whereas Chinese, they catch them for whichever purpose they are sent. 2 people were there with us in Indo-China Chamber of Commerce. Both were educated in India. One educated in Delhi University, another one educated in Jawaharlal Nehru University. One is a lady, one is a male. These together, one is the director, one is the chairman for Indo-China Chamber of Commerce. Do we give such an opportunity for youth who have got training? We never bother to take the best use of those trained youth from coming out from colleges or experienced in worldwide. So this blinkers off today, coming back to this topic, by Gauri Dwivedi is an excellent eye-opener for the whole nation, for the political system, for the bureaucracy, that they need to understand the incoming danger to India as well as to the whole world. So this is a timely eye-opener, and she has highlighted some of the things, pages I have gone through. She has highlighted in a variety of formats. But then, what is that we need to do? Shall we divide China into 4 or 5 parts? That is one. We have to divide that. It's a dragon. It won't keep quiet. And they are very hypersensitive. They react very fast, and they don't care for anything. It is this sort of a thing, and one of the oldest civilization and culture, and intact nation. That nation never got separated in many. Like India, we were once with Afghanistan was ours, Pakistan was ours, even Bharatakande, Bharatavarsha, those times even Iran, Iraq, Egypt also was one, and of course Malaysia, and then the Burma, they were all part of India. But see how we have lost all those things. Today we are struggling with Pakistan. I don't know what happens tomorrow. See, the spirit of nation is lacking among us. It is very essential that we have to take the necessary. Before further disintegration takes place, this is a timely warning because China has a tendency of poking from every border. Arunachal or Ladakh or from Pakistan side, they will never use there. They will use other shoulders and they support them. They will support them. That's how they are going to play mischief. And we have to be, and Gauri Dwivedi has brought out excellent book, and I'm sure it will be taken note and it will take into further conclusion, especially Prajna Bharati will ensure that this goes into the government officials, to the political level, and then take it to the logical conclusion. Thank you for having given me an opportunity.
Thank you, Reddy Garu. Now I request the guests to launch the book, Blinkers of How the World Will Counter China. Rajesh ji, could you please assist? Launching the book. Yes, as soon as. I request Hanuman Chaudhary Garu and General A.R.K. Reddy Garu to launch the book. Now I request Chandrasekhar ji to do the book review. Shri V. Chandrasekhar, State Joint Secretary, Prajna Bharati. He is an academician, mathematician and entrepreneur with over 20 years of experience in the field of teaching. He is a professional trainer to teachers and lecturers, a career guidance counselor for youth. He is an organizer and active participant of events related to academics, politics and various professional organizations. Chandrasekhar ji, the podium is yours.
Thank you, Veda. Andariki namaskaram. A very warm welcome to you all this evening. Greetings to the dignitaries on the dais and also all the guests present here. First of all, let me say this. I'm quite happy for being asked to review this book. Of course, I know it's a big task because of the topic itself. And while going through this book, while reading this book, after finishing it, the first opinion I had was like, how can these classified papers are in my hands? To be precise, she has done an extensive research and the data she has on hand, and more importantly, the analysis she came up with, it's definitely commendable. And my feeling is this book is a very good read and it can be a very handy book for the researchers and the students who are actually preparing their thesis, and even for the academicians and even for the common man. And it's an excellent book with a lot of information
She has done, like I said, a lot of research work, and she came up with so many facts and figures and statistics and in-depth analysis. You need a lot of time to go through to understand it. And of course, that's what I feel. And you need to read it, understand it, discuss it, and give awareness to your friends, people. This is the feeling I found I had after finishing this. And before even I start talking about this book, the first page, when you open the book, the readers are posed with a question. Is this Cold War 2? And Gauri ji, in fact, she did compare the nations like USA and Russia, the strong nations of those time, Cold War time, and the circumstances, the challenges, and then she did come up with the perfect answer. And also she compared the nations like USA and China today, of today, and she said finally, no, it's not Cold War. Then you start thinking. And suddenly she gives a twist, saying it's not Cold War, but it's a lot more, a much more. Then you start thinking once again. So to understand this, you definitely have to go through this book. You have to read it. And she mentioned that China is a superpower in a hurry. It's true. We all have been hearing a lot of stories how China has been behaving, how it has been interfering, not just with the neighbors, but also with the nations where it does not have anything in common. We all know about it, but we know in general what we gather from the news channels and papers probably. But she has got the proofs for everything. She explained it very well in this book. And she also talked about how China is determined to change the world order on the land and sea, of course. Why? To reach its authoritarian goals by formulating rules and standards of its own. And it wants to set some particular rules which are in favor of China, which would do good to China on important issues like health, cybersecurity, food security, and matters which actually matter most to the entire humanity. It will affect the entire humanity. These kind of changes will affect the entire humanity. And she also said in the book that China has planted proxies in almost all the international organizations. We had seen that even in this COVID times, how WHO behaved. Even as on today, no one knows where is the origin, what is the origin of this COVID virus. For namesake, they did an inquiry. But as on today, no one is sure and clear about the origin. So why is it interfering? Why is it planting the proxies into these international organizations? Because it wants its own versions of human rights to be normalized. That is very clear. It has got a very clear agenda. In fact, further ahead, she spoke of the Chinese expansionist ideology, how it is behaving. It has been and it is still behaving. I'm sure it will still keep doing it by provoking and bullying other nations. It has been raising territorial issues. We had seen what it has done with us, with India. In fact, with the small nations, it has been trapping small and resource-rich nations into heavy debts. What does it do? It lends money because it will choose, it will identify the nation. It will check if it is worthwhile because it has to get the money back, but then they won't be able to pay by the time it adds up all the interest and all that. It will repay, it will make it repay in terms of those natural resources. It will get hold of those countries. That is what it has been doing. This is one way of getting hold, stretching its tentacles. And like she said in the book, China has extended its tentacles from Asia, Africa. Naturally, there are so much of natural resources, minerals in Africa, and even into Europe with a lot of huge investments. In fact, China has waited for its time, waited patiently, and yet it has been doing what it wanted to do right in front of the eyes of every nation, every of us. We have been watching, and most of us, most of the nations didn't understand what it was doing. Now, what China is today, it hasn't come up overnight. It has been doing it right in front of the eyes. And if you look at the maritime infrastructure also, it entered into all the areas. It has formed the military base in Djibouti in Africa, to civilian ports near Israel's Haifa port, and also in Sri Lanka, Hambantota port. Why? Because this kind of infrastructure, when it has in the oceans, in the waters, it has captured the strategic points. Tomorrow, when it becomes necessary for China, a sort of war, not necessarily real war with the ammunition, it can choke up the ways, it can choke up the pathways, and it can disrupt the supplies of essentials and military supplies and whatever, anything. Logistics will be like blocked totally. What will it do? It will cause a lot of economic damage to the whole world, and China will be enjoying it. So this is how China has been planning and making its path easily. So this is how the tactics of China have been. And COVID is a bad thing, of course. It doesn't have to be the way it was, but it did. Now, as a blessing in disguise, COVID has actually removed the mask of China's face. That is what exactly happened. That's why I'm saying it's a blessing in disguise. Now the world knows what exactly is the face of China, what its intentions are and its motivations are. So, the image China was projecting to the world, that it is a superpower, strong nation, that it will willingly stand up for the world when it is really necessary, when the world is in crisis, I will stand for you. This is the image it wanted to give. But then it's totally gone, it's fell off, it has fallen off. We have seen, after COVID, it actually supplied low quality stuff to the nations in the name of helping. Is this how a nation should be when it wants to create peace? No, not necessarily. But it has done. This explains what is the attitude of this nation, China. And the rise of China, it hasn't achieved on its own. Some Western powers have really helped it. Why? Because by cooperating China, they have had economic gains, for sure. So, this is how they became blind. They were gaining, they had economic gains, so they kept quiet. They acted as if they were blind. So this is the reason why China has reached where it is today. And in her book, Gauriji also spoke about the China's efforts to change global power equations, how it managed Pakistan and Iran as well. And in fact, the latest situation in Afghanistan, I think she hasn't spoken much about it, because by the time I think the book got printed, I'm sure she will do it in her next books, definitely, how it will affect as well. So what I'm saying after reading this book on this aspect was, this COVID has actually put brakes on China's ambitions and plans. That is what is the situation currently. Now, the pandemic has exposed the fault lines and threats posed by China and its supreme leader to the world, that she has mentioned very clearly. And if we look at what will happen, what can China do? The nations can behave the way they want, but what can China do? So, not necessarily the traditional conventional war. It can actually punish economically. That's what it has done. And I'll take two examples, one in contrast to the other. Norway, the Nobel Peace Prize comes from, the committee sits there and then it will actually identify and recognize an individual or an organization who have done a great work to better the humanity, nations, to come up with a lot of peace on the planet. This is what it does. It will identify the person or an organization and gives the award, peace award. What it has done, what is its mistake? It has chosen one Chinese national who did raise his voice against the human rights violations in China. So, it stopped importing the sardine fish from Norway to China. So 92% of the imports became 29%. That's how the tilt was. This is the kind of economic damage, imposition, it's like, it can cause. And on the other hand, Australia, it raised and it demanded a question saying we need a fair inquiry into the origins of this COVID. So what immediately the response from China was, no, it might affect the trade between Africa and China. But then, because of the stature Australia has got, it did not yield and it stood on its word. It still demands. So I'm just saying in contrast, that was Norway, the tiny nation, and this is Australia, stronger. So comparatively, this is how the behavior of China is. And okay, I haven't got much time. Why this kind of attack and Chinese behavior towards the other nations? What is the inspiration for China? I think she has mentioned, I just want to read it out as it is. Actually, China got its inspiration from Sun Tzu, the pioneer of Chinese military thinking. The measures to tackle enemy systematically. The text as it is, I want to read. Ultimate excellence lies not in winning every battle, but in defeating the enemy without ever fighting. The highest form of warfare is to attack strategy itself. The next, to attack his alliances. The next, to attack armies. The lowest form of war is to attack cities. Siege warfare is a last resort. This explains their attitude towards the nations across the world. Now, she has highlighted a lot of problems the world is facing, and she also spoke about the clear roadmap, and she actually defined which country can do what, depending on their strengths and weaknesses. She suggests nations must come together, they must come up with a proper road plan, and they must be ready to counter China. This is what she came up with. And finally, before closing the book, she actually asked with another question as well, what if another virus originates from China? It's a big question, it's a worrying question as well. So she suggested for that, because yeah, if it happens, a lot of money, billions spent on all these infrastructure, nuclear weapons and all that, they all become redundant, right? They could become useless. So she suggests coalition of countries is a must, and of course, 1972 Biological Weapon Convention should be empowered. That is how nations must come together, do it properly, plan properly, take a path, and be ready to counter China. That's what she suggests from the book. And I feel, like I said in the beginning, it's a perfect read. Please do read. Buy your own copy and read. Today it's actually an offer. 795 rupees is the MRP, but you will get it for 600 rupees only. Please buy and read your own copy. Understand, discuss, spread it to others. And the book is a perfect one. Thank you once again, ma'am. In your next book, I'm sure you will cover Afghanistan as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chandrasekhar Garu, for helping us understand the mind of the author, the Chinese expansionist theory, origin of COVID-19, financial colonization of the world, and solutions countries have to counter it. A small announcement, as Chandrasekhar ji said, you can buy the book that has been launched today at a discount, and also you can get the book signed and take a selfie with the author at the end of the session today. I'd like to now introduce our next speaker, Shri Lieutenant General A.R.K. Reddy Garu. He has served the Indian Army for about 40 years, commissioned to the Bihar Regiment, known as one of the finest infantry regiments of the Indian Army. He took part in the wars of 1962, 1965, 1971, IPKF in Sri Lanka, Kargil operations in 1999, and anti-terrorist operations in Punjab, Northeast, and Jammu and Kashmir. He has served as the Chief of Staff of Eastern Command and Northern Command. For his outstanding service, he has received the Parama Vishishta Seva Medal (PVSM) and Ati Vishishta Seva Medal (AVSM) from the President of India. Reddy Garu, the podium is yours.
Yeah, it's okay. Sabaka Namaskaram. Dr. Hanuman Chaudhary sir and the people on the dais. Ma'am, you've done a very good book for us. An excellent book, a beautiful reading. It's not a Warren Hastings style of oratory English. It's a very, I would say, just as if the author is speaking to you, narrating her complete research what he has done on this book. It's not, it's a, you don't take it as a book reading, you take it as you are conversing with the author, and you will be able to understand much better the research thesis that she has gone through and put a beautiful book for us. I just want to say my experience of China. I was 21 years when I was an officer, and I was at Sela in now Arunachal Pradesh, then Assam, and we were attacked in late September. My senior officer, one major, was grievously injured, and we had no ammunition, we had nothing at that time. We were surrendered. I was captured, along with 20 of my Jawans, and taken to Tawang, then to Bumla. Third day of my captivity, I escaped along with my 20 men. I did not come back alone. I had only just about 5 months of service in the Indian Army, and came back via Bhutan back to India. So my hatred to China, I need not tell you anything more than this small personal episode of mine. Thereafter, I spent quite some time in the Eastern Command and Northern Command dealing with McMahon Line, dealing with violations by China, dealing with creeping tendency of the China. They like, for example, you see the book beautifully written, interwoven inside, she injected these type of small anecdotes of China. They will come 10 steps ahead, and you pressurize them, they will go back 2 steps. You further pressure them, they will go up 2 more steps, but they will not go back 10 steps. Now, once again in the book, it's a 4 segments, 18 chapters with a prologue and epilogue, texted sequentially, probably geographically for any one of us to read. Talks of first the Indo-Indian Ocean region, IOR, talks of the Pakistan, Iran, and goes on the conflicting nations. Then thereafter goes to Europe, because without Europe nothing happens in the world, because Europe is the backyard or a sidekick of US. So they're like the NATO countries and the Warsaw Pact countries of the Cold War. She beautifully writes how China has been able to subvert the economy of Germany, France, UK, Scandinavian countries, All this integrated into one chapter, probably you must have found it difficult to concise it. Ocean of data available. I'm sure she must work with the raw or something to get hold of this data. Otherwise, this data is not available for a common man. And I don't recollect having read this in any of the newspapers and various other organizations and systems. Now, having put them into, I won't say Europe came on the debt trap, but adequately, because Europe is nothing but tradesmen. They were only trade, they were only business. Ethics, their ethics are interwoven with business and profits and profit and loss account. Whereas when it comes to Asian countries, we have a different dispensation. I'll list from Vietnam through Korea to Manila to Philippines to Malaysia, Burma into India, Pakistan, and go into Iran even. Ethics matter for us. But when it comes to the nation states and their ability to conduct themselves and democratize themselves, there is a adverse reverse. Now, China is one system. China cannot be friend with anyone for all the time. China can be a friend for a duration. In the book, when the author talks about Africa or the Indian Ocean, it beautifully touches how China wants to take their mineral wealth. Because there is no such wealth in Europe. There is a wealth in Africa. There is a totally a virgin soils available for anyone to exploit. Like Ratan Tata one day said, I'll do business in India, but make profits in Africa. So that means there is a place to exploit. And China is the greatest exploiter, like the way it is exactly put in the book. So all the countries, without exception, right from the beginning of the poverty-stricken countries are the one which China will address first. Having addressed that particular one, when China knows very well they are unable to discharge the loans, unable to pay back the loans, and then they fund further, and then they become the neo-colonialism beautifully explained in the book. What constitute a colony of those days and what constitute a neo-colony of today has been beautifully explained in this book in terms of statistics, geography, economy, military, all that encompasses a nation states living. When it comes to South China Sea, again history stratifies this into three parts. How China has been able to small, it's not a great place. How China, these islands have got a tendency, surface, submerge, surface, resubmerge. How one of the reefs that surfaced, China has been able to sort of indulge in a dredging operations, build a beautiful island and a runaway from where China deployed its missiles to have a sort of range advantage, a distance advantage to launch its missile systems. It couldn't have been thought of by people. The author probably had done some other calculation in a brain, in a mind, to put this into a sequentially how South China Sea, how East China Sea, and all these things. It now brings America into this for reason says, America has a commitment with South Korea, America has a commitment with Taiwan, and it cannot be diversed with South China Sea and its Chinese exploitation of this particular region and a fight for exclusive economic zone. These type of things make the littoral nations within themselves they fight. China is the one which will arbitrate. While arbitrating, they will gulp the whole thing. The nations who are fighting will remain where they are, but the bigger, like Telugulo kadunna, pitta kada pilli dirchindani. So that there's a small proverb in Telugu. So that is the one. What happened is China will gulp everything and leave these people continue to fight. One of the examples she has given was International Court of Justice has given one of the reefs to go to Philippines, Manila. But China never accepted it. Worse was, Philippines never exerted it. Philippines is a state with the United States. The United States also did not exert its pressure to say this is the International Court of Justice award. It legitimately goes to Philippines. Did not happen. It continues to have problems. Now the book goes on to read into various disciplines of China's ability to subvert any lasting countries. Attempted even, for that matter, the job losses, America, which she has written on this one, how China attempted by bringing the monopoly of manufacturing sector into China. American FDIs came into China, invested, and then some profits given to themselves, some profits to themselves. But there is a beautiful catch in this. Either they give a contract, they will do whatever it is in the Bridge and Road Initiative, the initiative which the China has taken. The contract system, she has explained in the book, the China will award the nation is there on which the road is being constructed. Normally we take it at least 80% of the labor contracts will go to that host nation. It did not happen. The contract will be awarded to China. Chinese contractors. They will award to subcontract to them. And the profits will go back where? To mainland China. Now the country for which the road is being constructed or the initiative being taken continue to be poverty stricken and get back into that debt trap. Like Sri Lanka has sold their airport, their seaport for 99 years. In the similar manner, they'll give their countries also some other thing. You take it. After all, history is replete with examples. Russia sold Alaska to US. It's not that it has happened by China. Even US also usurped Alaska. Alaska was part of Russia. Through Canada, they taken Alaska. So it is in the Committee of Nations. There is a type of pressures and releases that go on. Now, in this particular book, somewhere she has mentioned, the author has mentioned something about the deep state. The concept of a deep state is a very interesting phenomenon. You can call the deep state anything. In India, we got plenty of them. For example, why America lost the war in Vietnam? It lost the war because of the deep state problems. It is their media. It is their dissent. It is the party which is in the shadow. All these things put together, the deep state which is invisible for the rest are the one. What is the deep state for China? Ma'am, if I can take the liberty of saying so. The deep state, my way of looking for China is lack of democracy, lack of transparency. I'll put it one more step further. Their unfortunate atheism, their atheists. 70% of atheists, suppressed atheists. I won't say they're atheists, suppressed atheists. I have an experience, small anecdote I'll share with you. There was a Chinese company constructing in the electro-steel in Jharkhand. I was there as an advisor on the extremism to that government. I noticed the Chinese 3-4 people wanted to go to Bodh Gaya. There was somewhere latent in them, the Buddhism in them. They wanted to go to Bodh Gaya. They went to Bodh Gaya. Just about a handful of them, 4 or 5 of them in one sumo, they went and came back. In 3 days' time, 2 companies worth, almost about 500 Chinese were there. There was agitation, we want to go to China. Oh, so we want to go to Bodh Gaya. So there is some hidden, suppressed belief or a faith in them which has not come. This is the deep state I am talking about. The exploitation which, how to go about, this is one of the subjects. Sorry, I jumped the subject. Ma'am, this book is a beautiful book. I'll recommend to anyone. In my style, I'll recommend to my fraternity in the Indian Army, Indian Armed Forces. At the end, you probably relied heavily on the Quad, the American, Australian, Japan and India equation will be a messiah of virtue or something like this. Yes, Quad is good, but you've seen yourself now Australia will backtrack, when the national interest comes, not necessarily they will hold with this. Not necessarily America will hold in this particular one. The affected nation today of the belligerence of China is India. Mostly. Be it Confucius theory, be it Sun Tzu's theory, whatever it is which he has adequately mentioned in the book, how the equations take. Iran is a Shia country. Pakistan is a Sunni country. Sunni dominated country. Both are fundamentalistic countries. No faith, they will never be able to come together for all the time. At a point in time, they'll break. Afghanistan, we had a Sunni mosque, was about 100 people died not too long ago. A bomb was put in Afghanistan after the present, this one. So this equation of Iran, Pakistan will not last very long. It will break one day. It will break on its own weight. You don't have to do any effort. It will break on its own weight. Now, the book recommends a consolidation of like-minded people from Europe, France, UK, Germany, and Australia here, Japan, India. There is a scope led by, obviously, USA. There is a scope to checkmate China, and I pray for that day. Ma'am, you've done very well for us, this book. I really enjoyed reading book. And at the end, I'll say how much we can trust in a marriage of convenience. A marriage of convenience doesn't last very long. Marriage of ethics and very certain will last. This book has given definitely the blinkers, you beautifully named it too, given insight into how India should approach the problem. Rightly, Mr. Chandrasekhar has said how the bureaucracy which controls the nation, the political system, we have a very strong government today. You see, China is known to, you have said this also in your book, known to disrespect every document they signed. 1994, P.V. Narasimha Rao time, confidence building measures were signed after Nathula incident. Next day itself, they burned the paper. They burned every paper that has taken place. Why go so far? Their own constitution or whatever it is says only 2 terms for the president. Now the president has burned that and made it, lifetime. So they don't believe in papers. One of the meetings we had, I was part of some 6-7 meetings of China on the McMahon line. One of the meetings we decided, please explain what are your claim lines, including New Delhi. Please explain what are your claims today and be firm on it. And India will bring what are our claim lines and bring it before, and the next meeting we'll have a discussion on this. We went with 7-8 briefcases with us. And China came, we didn't see anyone bringing anything. They just came in, they also came with 7-8 people, this is a diplomatic sitting. And we have to hide our briefcases and not unfold it. They came with a map which is a size of a matchbox. I mean, it is not possible. the artificial intelligence, cyber war, the information technology and its warfare, space technology, and were very elaborately covered in this book. I won't take very long. Thank you very much. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. Thank you, sir. And God bless. And my namaskarams to Pragna Bharati also, please.
Thank you, General A.R.K. Reddy Garu, for sharing your experiences as a soldier and your insights as a serviceman with regards to China. I have a small announcement. Those of you who are interested in being associated with Pragna Bharati, we have a slip with our organizers. You can give in your details, your contact details, and also specify your area of interest so that we can stay in touch with you regarding our future events. Now I'd like to introduce the chairman of Pragna Bharati, a man who needs no introduction, Padma Shri Dr. Tripuraneni Hanuman Chaudhary Garu. He is 90-year young driving force behind Pragna Bharati. An engineer by profession, he is regarded as a pioneer in the field of telecom and IT industry. He has authored more than 20 books and is the true definition of an intellectual Kshatriya. His life is spent in the relentless service of Bharat Mata and dissemination of our Sanatana value system. Chaudhary Garu.
नमस्कार, आप सब बोलिए नमस्कार, नमस्कार, वंदे मातरम, जय श्री राम, जय श्री राम, जय श्री राम. 221 years ago, Napoleon, the conqueror of almost the whole of Europe, excepting Russia, said, "Let China sleep. It is a giant, let it sleep. If it wakes up, the earth will shake." 221 years ago, that's what Napoleon said, and it has woken up. The earth is shaking. How it is shaking, and how the earth's shake-up can be averted is excellently written in this wonderful book, Blinkers Off. We have been having blinkers. They started with Jawaharlal Nehru, with the Hinduchini Pai, and in 1962, that vision was shattered, and of that, Nehru died, leaving us a legacy of shame. Friends, China is a wonderful country, a very great country. There are only two civilizational states in the world. One is China, another is India, with a continuous history of a civilization. China's civilization has been shaped by a number of people, the chief of whom was Confucius. And the second one was Sun Tzu. Confucius was about culture, about philosophy, about dharma, about statecraft, and whatnot. Sun Tzu was about how to conduct wars. Without sending even soldiers, how can we conquer the enemy, etc.? That's a great civilization. And 11 years ago, one Zhang Weiwei, a professor of international relations in one of the Chinese universities, wrote this book, China Wave, 10 years ago, 2011, and he says, we are a civilizational state. What is a civilizational state? Whose civilization is continuous, and in spite of various vicissitudes, various thundering attacks, invasions, the essential nature of the country, the philosophy is preserved. That's China and India. I had visited the country 5 times. Once in 1965, when it was in convulsions of the Cultural Revolution, when corpses were flowing in the river Canton and other rivers. Mao Zedong launched the Cultural Revolution to undo all its past history, saying that was responsible for the humiliation of China by a combination of 8 European powers in the mid-19th century. They are called Opium Wars, and China fought them back. The 8 European powers were trading with China, which has got the largest amount of GDP until the mid-19th century, and 25% of the world's wealth, 25% of the world's trade. So they were feeding opium, and in order to, and also proselytizing, this was resisted by what was called the Opium Wars and the Boxer Revolution, the Boxer Rebellion in China. That is the history. And modern history is that when I went in 1965, it was at the height of Cultural Revolution. And the second time I went was 1989, along with Rajiv Gandhi and P.V. Narasimha Rao Garu, to open up international subscriber trunk dialing between our two countries. And then I saw cycles and cycles and cycles. That was the state. It joined, no, before that, Deng Xiaoping, Mao Zedong drenched China in blood. About 4 million people died both of starvation and revolution. But he wove the country into one great unit. Deng Xiaoping saw that this was not enough, and he said, we should be, it is glorious to be rich, glorious to be rich. It is immaterial whether the cat is black or white as long as it can catch the rat. And some people should become rich before poverty can be eliminated. So he liberalized much before P.V. Narasimha Rao Garu in India. And that liberalization has, with one condition, no family shall have more than one child. And with that control on the population and the determined liberalization, until 1992, India and China were having the same per capita income. And since then it wanted to capture the world's trade and garner all the wealth. It wanted to join the World Trade Organization, superseding the GATT, General Agreement on Trade and Tariffs. So it could join the World Trade Organization only in the year 2001. And then the entire economy of the world it has captured. It is the largest trading country in the world for manufactures 18 million cars per year, whereas United States produces only 11. And it has demonstrated that it has come of age by holding the World Olympics in the year 2008. And of course, much earlier, it fought even the Soviet Union in 1965 on the river Ussuri, an island. Should it belong to Soviet Union or to me? Which shows that China was not afraid of any superpower even in the 1960s. That is the Atma Gaurav that India does not possess, which we should try to possess. Gauriji, I have seen in her book, there are 150 references consisting of papers, books and reports. She has done wonderful research. And what is China? When the Soviet Union was very strong and it was having an arms race and a will to control the entire world, its GDP was 40% of the United States. Soviet Union at the height of its power, when it was challenging the United States, its GDP was 40% of that in the United States. Today China's GDP is 60% of the United States. United States has $25 trillion and China is $15 trillion. And by the year 2028, it wants to exceed, overtake America. And therefore America company hai. It is shivering. So, by presenting to us lots of statistics, lots of analysis, how China has penetrated the entire world. The European Union, its mouth is shut because all the 20 and odd countries in the European Union have got a trade with China, and almost all of them have got deficits. So does United States, that a trade imbalance. India has also got a great trade imbalance. So China, with a $15 trillion economy, is able to invest everywhere. BRI, Belt and Road Initiative, with that one, constructing roads and harbors in Pakistan, in Djibouti, in so many places, constructing artificial islands, like artificial satellites, artificial islands, and it wants to dominate the entire Pacific and Indian Ocean. So is it possible for a country like India, which is just about $3 trillion GDP, to compete with China of $15 trillion, and where there are no elections, no giveaways as in India? That's one of the questions. Therefore, in her book, what she has done is, what could be the correlation of the forces to dominate the Pacific Ocean and the Indian Ocean? 12,000 kilometers is the distance between the west coast of United States of America and China. And it is not a great superpower with all the deficits, and the election of Obama and Biden, it shows to what extent America has deteriorated. Therefore, it is only a combination of forces that can stop the United States, the Chinese. It has, when he wrote this book, he was talking of the great civilization. And he was proud to say that unlike the European powers, which through trade had established colonies and established imperialism all over the world, China is content with developing its own resources. That's until 2010. But afterwards, whatever is there underground in Africa is all belonging to the China. That means all the wealth that God has created under the dark continent is now China's. By extending loans to so many countries which they cannot pay back, therefore it is even getting the natural resources and soil itself for China. Then how can we stop? That's where, in one of our analysis, she said about the Quad, the four countries, that is Japan, America, Australia and India. Only if these four countries come together, and what are their own interests, what are the mutual interests, and what is India's capability, because only India has got the population to match that of China. Years ago, France has said that it has become the manufactory of the world. You name anything, whether it is aluminium or telephones or anything, it is China which is making. Even the toys that are there in India, most of the toys are coming from China. So through trade and through economic investment and by showing its power everywhere, if you don't toe my line, I will punish you economically. If I cut off my trade, you are finished. So by threats like that and military, second largest military spender is China. Number one is America. Number three is India. Number four is Saudi Arabia. But India does not make its arms itself. We have been depending upon Russia to the extent of 30% of all our armor, all our weapons systems are from Russia. Now only Atmanirbhar, etc. are there. So in this book, through our great study, scholarly study, more importantly, interpretation of the figures that she has collected, she has said a great danger looms over the world. It cannot be contested or contained by one country. It is only through a combination of the countries. And those countries which are have terrific deficits with China cannot take the lead. The only countries that can take the lead are the United States, although it is the largest indebted country in the world. But people have got faith in its economy. That's why, although it is running deficits, although its debt is the highest in the world, it is sitting on a Himalayan pile of debt, United States, but still people have got faith in that one. So a combination of the United States, Japan, India and Australia can contain China in the Pacific Ocean and in the Indian Ocean region. I congratulate her, not only for collecting all the information, collating them and interpreting that information as to what its consequence of China's economic growth is going to be. 10 years ago, I presented a paper to our Defense Ministry saying a study about China's information technology war, militarization of space and weaponization of software. What China is doing is exfiltrating the information. Infiltration is by physical injection of people and spies and the fifth column like the communist parties in India. But exfiltration is taking out information from all your websites, from all your information technology networks. It is world's superpower number one in the exfiltration of information. It is being contested by the United States, Israel, South Korea, and to some extent Iran. You can see the wars of the future may not require the sending of any physical people. If you can cripple their information networks, then you will have won the war. In addition to that one, China has taken to the most inhuman warfare, that is biological warfare. All the United Nations imported organs have been infiltrated and taken over by China. International Telecommunication Secretary General to set up the standards for the telecoms and IT all over the world, China is heading that one. Similarly, WHO is and so many other organizations. So that is the dominance that China has arrived at. Can India match that? Not alone. But we have said, yes, we'll stand up, unlike Jawaharlal Nehru, who even said that we don't want any army, hey, Gandhiji, Ahimsa, etc., until he was humiliated in the 1962 war. We have shown that this government has shown we can stand up. There, Doklam, there, Galwan Valley. Therefore, we have demonstrated that it is possible that for India to stand up to bully China, but whether we can overcome or not, it depends upon the wisdom of these four countries and others. I once again compliment this young lady who is not only an intellectual, who is not only an economist, but a wonderful dancer, recognized by the government of India as belonging to the first class of dancers in India. May God bless you. Thank you very much for this excellent book, and we hope to see many more such works from you. Thank you. Namaskar. This is that book everyone should read. See, we celebrate women coming of age, men coming of age, etc. The way countries celebrate their power is by holding the International Olympics. China did it in 2008. Japan, after it has come out of the Second World War ruination, it also conducted Olympics. Similarly, Germany, etc. But we have not been able to conduct the World Olympics. We were satisfied with the Asia in 82-83. Right, carry on.
Thank you, Chaudhary Garu, for your invaluable guidance. It is my honor to introduce to you the author we are celebrating today, Shri Gauri Dwivedi. She is an alumnus of Delhi School of Economics and LSR College. She is an economist by training and journalist by profession, With over 16 years of experience, she has worked in both print and broadcast mediums in prestigious media houses including Economic Times, The Sunday Guardian and ET Now. After spending the early part of her career analyzing government decisions at the cross-section of public policy, governance and politics, she has branched into analyzing issues related to strategic affairs and diplomacy. She is also a classical dancer recognized as an outstanding category artist by the Ministry of Culture, Government of India. She is presently associated with two major think tanks, United Services Institution of India and India Foundation, where she has been working on issues related to strategic and security affairs. Gauriji, the podium is yours.
Thank you so much. It is my honor to be here and privileged to be with this panel, and I don't think there is anything bigger in terms of compliment when I heard the previous four speakers not only talk about the book, but the way they spoke gave me a huge satisfaction that the views and the ideas that the book presents have been well received, have been appreciated, and more importantly, they start a discussion. A book's core objective should be to begin a discussion, a dialogue in some of the newer aspects which haven't been done so till now or adequately done so till now. And that is what the book attempts to do. And I'm happy and satisfied that that seems to be the case here. Like I approached my book in terms of answering questions, I am also going to approach my discussion here in terms of answering questions. The three questions that I think I will speak on today will essentially be: why is this book important? What is it that this book really talks about? And what are these blinkers that I am saying that need to be removed? That is what the three questions are going to be. First and foremost, why is this book important? It comes at a time when there is immense changes that are happening around us. We may think South China Sea is so far away, how does it impact us? Taiwan is so far away on the map that how are we really going to be impacted? Why should we really be talking about what's happening further ahead in Iran as long as our oil imports are taken care of? Well, the fact of the matter is that we are now part of an interconnected world, and we are part in that part of the world where we have hostile neighbors. And the hostility of these neighbors have never been stronger as they are now. It also doesn't help that one of the neighbors also is now extremely strong and the second largest economy in the world. This book comes at a time when Xi Jinping is attempting to not just rewrite history, but make himself the greatest leader China has ever seen. His competition is with history. His competition is with two other people who are long dead. Mao Zedong achieved what many couldn't, which is that it unified China with Xinjiang and Tibet. Deng Xiaoping achieved another set of reunification, which was unifying China with Hong Kong and Macau. So what is really left on Xi Jinping's plate? He is competing with history, remember. So his plate is going to talk about reunification with Taiwan and possibly dealing with unfinished quote-unquote agenda as far as India is concerned. That pretty much leaves what he has to address and cement his place in history. He's already, as some of the other panelists pointed out, he is now leader for life. Nobody knows how long he could be. He could be till the age of 82 or longer, which could be another 15 years maybe. So in that period, his agenda is going to be two, which is Taiwan, and second is, it could be India. And they are related, not by geography, but by design. Design of Xi Jinping, design of the Chinese Communist Party. Some of the other panelists mentioned about, and Dr. Chaudhary mentioned that India and China are two civilizational states. And just like India, China also has a rich history, and they are as terrified and troubled by their party and by their leader as any other part of the world is. So the book makes a key distinction between China, Chinese people, and the Chinese Communist Party. The conversation and the talk that I am having today talks about only the Chinese Communist Party and Xi Jinping, and doesn't refer to the Chinese people as many think is an extension of the state. It isn't. Now coming back to what the Taiwan and the Ladakh issue and really means and how it impacts India. If the CCP does decide that time is ripe for us to now finish the unfinished agenda as far as Taiwan is concerned, it's only logical to assume that if we can defeat or if we can provide a fait accompli to America, which is the world's largest army, which still spends 3 times of what the Chinese do, then why is it that we will not be able to do so with India? What stops us from doing that? Also, Taiwan is surrounded by 3 defense treaty nations of US, which is South Korea, Australia and Japan. India doesn't have any of those luxuries. So the Chinese Communist Party and the leader of the Chinese Communist Party should ideally be thinking, if we can provide a fait accompli to Taiwan and to US by extension, can we do the same to India? Can we provide that? And that is exactly why what is happening around the world in South China Sea, in Taiwan, impacts New Delhi more than ever. And that is exactly why this book matters and should be read. That is the first part of the question. The second aspect is, what is this book really all about? The book attempts to answer questions that many have as far as China is concerned, but answers, simple answers, however, continue to elude them, which is, how did China rise? What really happened that started that engine that now is known as the growth engine, the manufacturing capital of the world? How did it really start? And how is it that the rise of China impacts everybody? Should we be impacted? After all, who doesn't like cheaper stuff? Who doesn't like cheaper goods, whether it is sofas or pants or toys? Everybody likes cheaper goods. So what's the problem? The problem is those cheaper pants are okay. Cheaper drones with surveillance technology is not okay. Cheaper toys are still fine, but cheaper 5G technology, which can cripple an entire nation, is not okay. So those are some of the questions that need to be answered in a larger way. And the third part about it is, what really can be done? Is China really unstoppable? Is this really this big Frankenstein monster that nobody really knows how to tame? After all, US cannot. Some of the other panelists before me did mention that US was far bigger when it had to deal with USSR during the peak of the Cold War. It is not so big in comparison when it comes to China. If it is not economically powerful, it is politically going through a phase of deep divisions. Can it really muster up and provide that much needed counter and resistance that China needs? And if US cannot do it, who will do it? Those are broadly the questions that Blinkers Off provides. Now I'm going to talk about how is it that China rose. Contrary to popular perception that Deng Xiaoping started these reforms, he did start those reforms. In 1979, first the agricultural reforms came and then the manufacturing reforms came. So yes, the reforms did happen. But was it really as simple that he started those 5 key reforms and the manufacturing engine started? Unfortunately, the popular perception is incorrect. I'll read a paragraph from the book which says, the story behind the $13 trillion. The creation of Bangladesh in 1971 and the events leading up to it have a close link in turning around the economic destiny of the Chinese people. While China woke up to investing majorly in Bangladesh from early 2010, as FDI from Chinese companies rose 10 times in the decade of 2010 to 2019, Bangladesh's birth was a major factor that put Beijing on its now much revered high growth trajectory. It must be painfully ironic for America that its Cold War with Soviet Union drove it to create a Frankenstein called China, with which it is now in a deeper and more intense power struggle. It seems several factors weighed on the then President Richard Nixon's decision to reach out to China to begin a formal association that over time resulted in more gains for Beijing than for Washington. One such factor was to neutralize the Soviet Union, which had aided India in its 1971 war with Pakistan. Since New Delhi, which was firmly in Moscow's orbit, had played an active role in Bangladesh's creation, US decided to cultivate China as an investment destination. For American companies, which were scouting for new markets that were large enough to absorb their excess capacity, both New Delhi and Beijing fit the bill. But Nixon chose China, despite the gory crimes committed by the Pakistani army in East Pakistan, which had forced India to intervene. Nixon's decision, which also was driven by his frosty equation with Indira Gandhi, led to his historic visit to China in 1972, which eventually opened the floodgates for US investments into the Chinese economy. And rest, as they say, is history. This sums up how China grew. It grew because of America. It did not grow, as I said, only because of a couple of reforms. Around the world, those reforms have been made. India has also made those reforms, maybe not so successfully, maybe not in tandem with the other set of reforms that China has made, but we have also made those. But we have not been able to see the same set of gains because of the factors that led to China's manufacturing creation, which was complete and undivided attention, focus, and commitment of American capital. Which is why in 2001 also, they asked China to join the WTO without fulfilling commitments. When you join an organization, you join by signing on TNCs. Everybody signs TNCs. China also signed those TNCs. 20 years later, those TNCs have not been met. Everybody knew that China would not follow and abide by those TNCs. But still, America pushed for it. And that is the reason why China grew where it did. Second aspect is, why does China's rise matters? It matters because it has a finger in every pie. There is no part of the world that is now not impacted by China and is not interwoven with the larger Chinese machinery. 120 countries around the world are either the first, which is the largest trading partner for China, or the second largest, which means that two-thirds, actually more than two-thirds of the world either have China as their largest trading partner or as their second largest trading partner. So that is how deeply intertwined China is to every part of the world, and which is why its rise matters. Again, to highlight just how much has China's hold increased in every geography, I am going to just read a short paragraph that explains China's hold over Europe. From football teams to strategic infrastructure like ports and airports, China's influence in Europe has grown exponentially in under 2 decades. In fact, during 2010 to 2019, Chinese companies gained ownership of 4 airports, including the Frankfurt-Hahn Airport in Germany, 6 ports, and over a dozen professional soccer clubs in Europe. Europe started screening only in 2019 about the dollars that were coming in from China, by which time it was too little, too late, because Beijing was in a position to dictate exactly which kind of human rights violations Europe had a say to comment on. That tells just how big China is and just how much its rise matters to every part of the world, from Latin America, which now is seeing massive investments from China, all the way to India, where we are seeing our neighbors being wooed away by the large and bottomless, if one may say, Chinese checks. Bangladesh, Nepal, Maldives, Mauritius, Seychelles, Sri Lanka, Pakistan. All of them have been wooed away by the massive checks that China has been able to successfully underwrite. The other part is, why is China's rise important? A single word answer to that is, because it's not peaceful. China's rise hurts other countries. That's why its rise matters, and that's why its rise is not peaceful. And that is the reason something needs to be done about it. I'll give an example of how China is able to effectively use any and every part of its varied and multifaceted existence. Economic warfare was in detail explained by Chandrasekhar ji. There are other aspects as well. China thinks it is now in a position to weaponize everything. I'll give you, and I'll quote what this is about 2 weeks back, I beg your pardon, 2 months back, where the Chinese Communist Party senior leader said about undersea cables. Although undersea cable laying is a business, it is also a battlefield where information can be obtained. That's how China thinks. That's why its rise is not peaceful. What is it wanting to do? It is wanting to create a digital Silk Route through those undersea cables, link all the data of 70 countries and undertake data mining. And what do you get when you do undersea data mining? You get submarine information. That's what you get. And that is what China is wanting to do. Just one example. I'll give another example of what the latest Taiwan National Defense Assessment Report says. This is last week. Deployment of JB series and Tiantong series by China for recce and communication satellites is meant to strengthen its supremacy in space and electromagnetic domains. What is it wanting to do? It is wanting to weaponize space. All the data that comes through electromagnetic domains, what can you do? If you have access to that kind of data, you can cripple satellites. What can you do? You can ensure that from GPS in civilian times to tanks to nuclear warfare in war times can be completely crippled. China is working on that. That's how China thinks, and that's why its rise is not peaceful. And that is why this book is titled Blinkers Off. Take off the blinkers to assume that China is this big manufacturing hub that just got on to this $14 trillion trajectory because of some big reforms and is now just wanting to be part of a globalized world. And you can take on China only by getting your tanks on land and submarine and frigates on water. No, it's thinking on undersea cable warfare. It is thinking about information warfare. It is thinking about outer space weaponization. That's how far it is thinking. And that's how complete and 360 degrees its perspective and view is about world dominance, about world domination. That's why its rise is not peaceful. And that is the reason why no single country can deal with it. Who can deal with ensuring data warfare is not done by China? Nobody on its own. Because unlike traditional boundaries, none of these aspects recognize or have any regard for boundaries. Data doesn't have regard for boundaries, neither does undersea cabling, nor does satellite data, or for that matter, even economy. All these require a concerted action. For better or for worse, Quad is probably the only set of alternatives we have to be able to find some sort of a solution to China's rise. It's not perfect, it's far from it. There are still questions whether they will come about if India is faced with more aggression on Ladakh border. Why should Australia bother about Ladakh? Why should India bother about Senkaku Islands? What have we got to do with whether or not, China flies more bombers on Guam or not? Only Australia should be bothered about it. Fair enough. It should not be bothering any one of the countries singularly. But as I said, it's only a collective response that can take on something as big as China. The other aspect that works for China, or I wouldn't say works for, but is the contrast between China and the democratically elected countries, is the political systems. Contrast the political system in China with the countries that are trying to counter it. There is no single perfect alternative. We can go from US to Europe to Japan to India. In Japan, one of the most sympathetic Chinese voices is now the Japanese foreign minister. Is that a perfect political answer to how China can be dealt with? Of course not. We can see back home in India, during the peak of the Doklam crisis, we had opposition leaders meeting Chinese ambassadors. behind scenes. Is that a perfect political response? Of course not. And that works to China's advantage because the CCP is able to ensure complete dominance by ensuring that there is no access to information, there is complete violation of human rights, and there is an absolute dictatorial regime. And Xi Jinping is only increasing his control and his dictatorial ways. So as I said, for better or for worse, Quad is probably the only set of alternative that nations have right now. And my sense is, and with which I will end also, that Quad will also have to develop going forward, how far is it willing to take on China? Is it willing to have a concept, a clear response to BRI, which by the way forms the core or the fulcrum of China's big political, global political clout? If you want to have a response to BRI, it's fairly simple. BRI average loan rate is 4.2%. 4.2% on a long-term project, 30 years, 40 years, is criminally high, shockingly high. To put it in perspective, for India got at sub 50 basis, a 0.5% rate from Japan for its high-speed bullet train that's going to be there from Ahmedabad to Bombay, at sub 0.5% rates. At 4.2%, you're talking about 25 times, 30 times. Long-term project finance. And that is the kind of debt it is now making nations fall into. Can the Quad provide a response and an alternative to it? Of course it can. The day it does, a lot of the questions will start getting answered. It doesn't require tanks and frigates to respond to China's aggression. It requires a concerted action in newer aspects of dominance and also hitting where it hurts the Chinese the most, which is the economy. If there is a concerted response to economy, a lot of questions will get answered, and more importantly, Xi Jinping's design to have 15 years ahead in terms of rule will be completely shattered, which is good for the world. And that's exactly what the premise of the book is all about. Thank you.
Thank you, Gauri-ji, for... I request Gauri-ji to present a copy of the book to Uday Shankar-ji, Director of All India Radio, Hyderabad. Thank you, Gauri-ji, for reading from the book and helping us understand what awoke the Chinese dragon, creation of Bangladesh, USSR, US, Cold War, its relation to China, growing Chinese imperialization through influence and strategic infrastructural projects, digital Silk Route, and some serious solutions. Thank you, Gauri-ji. Now the panel is open for the audience. If you have any questions, we'll just take one or two. Be very brief in what you want to ask.
Good evening.
Also introduce yourself, a brief, yeah. Yes.
Yeah. Good evening, ma'am. Good evening, all. I am Professor Vinita Sharma from AV College. My question, ma'am, another imminent danger facing all of us is your blinkers of perspective on China's absence at COP26 and then the sudden U-turn, the Glasgow Declaration, which they made along with US. How does that fit into the overall strategy of China?
So I have read it. Okay. China has no regard for environment rules, which is why they've changed those rules as well. They said first by 2030, they changed those rules. As far as whether or not it will meet these commitments, that's what you're asking, ma'am? It cannot meet those commitments, I can say that. It is the world's largest polluter. And as it faces a slowing economy, in the coal-rich belt that China has, because of flooding, a lot of that coal has actually not been used adequately. It's not being properly mined. And because of that, they've started using some of their old mines which they had shut. So now they will start going back to dirty fuel. And once those mines get opened, they will not be shut anytime soon. And China's economy is falling. It is not seeing the kind of growth it is. And it is now facing with energy prices that are going up majorly. As energy prices go up, environment is hardly a concern for anybody. So those dirty fuel will once again be used in greater quantity, and those environment commitments will not be met.
So it's just a farce what they have done.
Absolutely, yes. It will not be met.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yes.
This is Ram Mohan Ranga.
It's
I
not.
have two questions. One for Lieutenant. I've got two questions. One for Lieutenant General Reddy, retired, and later to Gauri Madam ji. Regarding this deep state of China, when you were talking, why didn't you consider the Communist Party of India and the pseudo-secular lobby in India as the deep state of China? You were talking about the deep state of China. Yes. You referred to some points within China, but even within India, there is the Chinese deep state. That is what I think. Let it be the Communist Party or even the pseudo-secular lobby within India.
No,
They are pseudo-secular.
No, it's not that. The deep state we are relating to what I said is part of the book which said, what is the deep state in China? In China. As of today, since it is only one communist party and they control and a dictatorial system, support their own saying, like for example, Hong Kong and China, when they came, they said one country, two systems. Hong Kong can have a democratic system, China can have this present system. But they supported this. So how to parry this in the terms of if you have a deep state which is pulling you down or sending you the signals. For that I said, one is the democracy, second is the human rights, third is the faith. All along the Chinese were known to be, like for example, Dalai Lama's influence, Panchen Lama's influence in China and this one on the Buddhism platform. That as the communism came and completely destroyed that. So that can be revoked, that form part of the deep state to checkmate the present, the governance of China. That's what I meant.
Gauri, a question for you. You were talking about the China or the Indian part. In Indian part, there are 5 fingers. That is what we all know. Yes? There are 2 questions in this. First thing is whether China will be aiming for the 5 fingers or India will be defending itself, or will there be a implosion within China?
Implosion within China may not happen immediately. It may happen over time due to economic concerns. The country is very clear that it will allow the CCP to run as long as their standards of living go up. If their standards of living don't go up, then they will ask, why should Xi Jinping be given a 3rd term? So that implosion may not happen right away. As far as India being able to defend its territorial integrity, the only country that China fears in Asia is India. There is no other country it fears. And that's the reason why it has invested in Pakistan. It is not invested in Pakistan because there is the mineral wealth that can only be found in that region, or because Pakistanis can do something that no other part of Asia can do. It is because they can attempt to encircle India. And that's why they are investing so heavily in Pakistan, and they'll continue to do so. So India will be in a position and is in a very strong position to defend itself territorially, and that's why China will continue to build on this aggression. And that is where we need a slightly long-term strategy. Look ahead in terms of your defense capability. Look ahead in terms of how you can build on your strengths, and look ahead in terms of matching economic capability. You can't achieve that overnight, but you have to reduce that disparity.
One question. Bhutan and Nepal are protected states by India. What if India takes over these two countries because they have got being protective states? India can deploy their particular army right across the complete northern border. This question might even be for Reddy, Lieutenant Colonel Reddy also.
I'll give General Reddy to answer this, but India and Nepal armies have worked very closely in the past and they continue to do so. They have a very rich tradition of working together.
The current scenario is altogether different.
China has not been able to digest even today the Sikkim question. Even today, it raises the question. See, China has not been able to digest we giving asylum to Dalai Lama. So if you have independent country like Nepal, you do any of these things, even the Committee of Nations, actually in our own ethics don't permit this. Second point, as far as Bhutan is concerned, Bhutan is definitely the complete, I won't say it's a protectorate like the way Sikkim was. It's an independent country, its own constitution, its own this one. But their foreign affairs and currency and communications are controlled by India. But at the same time, they are members of the United Nations. India respects them. All these things together, and that is a better arrangement than doing any tinkering with any of these things. As far as Nepal is concerned, your question was legitimate. We lost by time our intervention into which is the only Hindu state in the world. We lost by time, and probably our intervention was inadequate at that time. And it's too late.
Thank you. Now I request Ram Mohan ji to assist with the felicitations to our guests. I request Chaudhary ji and General A.R.K. Reddy Garu to present a small memento of appreciation to our author Gauri Dwivedi ji. I now request Chaudhary ji and General A.R.K. Reddy Garu to present a memento of appreciation to Reddy Garu, to General A.R.K. Reddy Garu next. Chaudhary ji, please present a memento. Yes. And also a small memento of appreciation for V. Chandrasekhar Garu. I now request Rajesh ji to present the vote of thanks. Ram Mohan ji, thank you very much.
Thank you very much for giving the opportunity. And on behalf of Pragya Bharati, first I would like to thank Gauri Dwivedi ji for coming all the way from Delhi and spending a lot of time here and giving a wonderful insight about the book and giving the explanation and answering the questions. And at the same time, I would like to congratulate General A.R.K. Reddy Garu for giving us his Pragya Bharati's guiding and advisory council member, and thanks for spending your time here and giving the insights about the book, and Ramesh Reddy Garu for giving the opportunity to use the auditorium from the AV College, and Vandita Sharma Garu for supporting and making a lot of preparations here, and the staff of AV College, for spending their efforts and providing that wonderful atmosphere here, cleaning the premises and making this good for all of us. And I would like to thank All India Radio Director Garu and I would like to thank Chandrasekhar Garu for giving the good review of the book. Book review. And thank you very much for the audience, and thank you very much for everything. And those who are watching us online also, I would like to thank them. And we'll be doing this kind of programs now and then. And those who are actually following our social media assets can get this information earlier and watch us on live. Thank you very much. And now we are going to have a national anthem. Please stand up for the national anthem.
Again, a small announcement before the national anthem. Those of you who are interested, please leave your details with the organizers, Pragya Bharati organizers. Thank you so much. Please, those of you who have taken the feedback forms, please give it back to our organizers. And those of you who have also bought the book can get your book signed and take a selfie with Gauriji at the end of the session.
जनगण मन अधिनायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता पंजाब सिंध गुजरात मराठा द्राविड उत्कल बंगा विंध्य हिमाचल यमुना गंगा उच्चल जलधि तरंगा तव शुभ नामे जागे तव शुभाशिष मागे गाये तव जय गाथा जनगण मंगलदायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता जय हे जय हे जय हे जय 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 हे भारत माता की जय।